Hello, I am Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be discussing what makes a good leader in Puzzle and Dragons. So, the purpose of this article, or more so the inspiration for this article, came about because I constantly see floating around people asking the question of what makes a good leader? Is this a good leader? Is this good? So on and so forth. And that is a very loaded question because there is no really good clear-cut answer because the best response you could possibly give is it depends on your subs. Because no matter how powerful a leader is, if it doesn't have the right kind of support in the right subs, inherits, latents, plus eggs, and basic team composition, you won't be able to succeed in a dungeon regardless of how good it is. And there are many other tier lists, especially originating from Japan, that rank the leaders or various leaders based on how good they are. But these lists can be misleading because it only assumes you have the perfect team, which, to be fair, is the fairest way to compare them, because it's not fair if you don't compare ideal teams against ideal teams. However, a lot of these ideal teams are very challenging to form. Most players may not necessarily have the right subs, let alone the right inherits. So the team, despite having a strong leadership potential, may not succeed because you just simply lack the correct cards. So this article will basically be showcasing what makes a good leader, breaking it down, basically examining what are the components that basically allow a leader to excel in Puzzle and Dragons. So, just as a forewarning, as I mentioned already, that those tier lists that I mentioned, they only assume the ideal and perfect teams, and like I said, most people don't necessarily have those ideal and perfect teams. So you have to obviously make do with what you have, and because of that, you may not necessarily be able to run a leader that is very powerful just because you are lacking the correct kind of support. In addition, these tier lists actually don't assume, they make the presumption that you have perfect matching skills, and that can be misleading as well because not everyone can match the board optimally every single time. And a good example of this was maybe like a year or so ago. Anubis was actually ranked on the tier list because it had the potential to clear certain dungeons. However, not many people could hit the 8-9 combos minimum to actually activate him, so it was misleading, and you have to take into consideration your own matching skill level before you play a leader that is, say, too adventurous. So, these are basically the factors or components that make a strong leader. So, bind immunity. Now, it may seem very simple having a leader that is simply immune to binds. However, it's a very powerful ability to have because a lot of mechanics revolve around your leaders being bound. That will either waste an active skill or various turns. And in addition, a lot of monsters or encounters will do a bind when they are low health. And if your leader is immune to those binds, you can still activate your leader's skill provided the correct subs are not bound if it's a rainbow team, deal your damage and advance to the next floor, or you just simply have your defensive multiplier intact still. If it's multiplying, say, your health and recovery components or having a heart cross aspect, you still can benefit from those and survive the incoming attack. Furthermore, if your leaders are all bind immune, you actually have the potential to make a fully bind immune team. So that will greatly alleviate a lot of strain because, like I said, those low health mechanics essentially become just a skip or free turn for you. In addition, say you have some subs that are vulnerable to binds, you have the option to run a more softer bind clear. You don't have to dedicate an active skill to clearing binds. You can run something that has the Recover Bind Awakening and simply match a row of hearts to clear them. And that is great because in longer dungeons or more challenging content where you don't have many active skill slots available, you basically save yourself an entire skill and you can use that towards a different kind of utility that your leader may be lacking against. So bind immunity is very crucial, and it's one of the strongest factors I would weigh in for considering if the leader has good potential. Next is defensive multipliers or other components. And this may be a very old adage, or it's beaten into the bush. Again, I'm using those words again. But the point being is saying the best offense is a great defense. And it may be a cliche, but it does hold true in Puzzle and Dragons. There are many leaders who are capable of hitting outrageously high damage numbers. However, they simply falter in harder content because they can't survive the mechanics that prevent them from just one-shotting each floor. So by having these defensive multipliers or components, you are going to basically excel in harder content. Because if you have an augmented health pool and boosted recovery rates, you're able to tank larger hits and actually heal up from them. In addition, this is another reason why the heart cross meta is so powerful, because you are able to actually form the heart cross, which gives you defensive damage reduction, as well as basically healing you at the same time, as well as having very large damage output. So you want to ideally have a leader that has some sort of defensive component, because that is important for running through harder content. And next is, how well does their kit function? And now this word kit is basically a term I'm using to categorize all of their other components. So their awakenings, their active skill, and basically their base stats as well, and how it all synergizes with their leader skill potential, as well as the potential subs you bring. And the idea is, if you have a stronger kit, you're able to counter more mechanics naturally, so you obviously lower the need to bring certain subs. You also lower the need to have the right inheritance, so you can have the right base skill being used right away, as well as having awakenings that help boost your damage or survivability. So by having a stronger kit, your leader is better suited to tackle a wider range of dungeons. So an example of a very poor kit would be Reincarnated Lakshmi. And this is partially because her awakening skills are kind of scattered all over the place. She's a bit of TPA, a bit of row, she has a recover bind but no bind immunity, she has some skill boost, she has an auto heal, like she's kind of all over the place. So it's not really focused, but it does at least allow her to function, because you can counter at least most mechanics, but it's just kind of a weird scattering of awakenings. However, it's her active skill that is the most lacking, because her active skill only generates 4 hard orbs on an 8-turn cooldown. So this is a very poor value for an active skill. It's harder to inherit something over it because it's longer, it doesn't give you enough hard orbs for your full activation, and the heal is generally not used. So it's just in an awkward place, that active skill, so it's bringing down her overall viability. Because you can compare that heart-making active, say, Reincarnate Parvati, who is much stronger, or Miru, who makes more hearts with a lower cooldown. So Lakshmi does have a poor kit in that sense, just from her awakenings and her active skill point of view. Her stats are great, because it's 1,000 weighted stats, so it's wonderful. On the flip side, someone like Aizen has one of the stronger kits, because his weighted stats are quite high, his awakenings are all very synergistic. He's got the bind immunity, got the recover bind, he's got the ample time extends to form your double color cross, as well as having an active skill that synergizes beautifully with your leader skill. You are able to form your required dark orbs, you are able to switch his color into dark so you do more damage. So his kit overall is very solid by comparison to Reincarnated Lakshmi. And that's another reason why he's a more desirable leader, because of all those components. And the next factor to consider when determining if a leader is good or not is consistency. And consistency is referring to how easily you can activate their leader skill. And this is not from a player skill point of view, but how easy it is to activate from a given board. Basically, in Puzzle & Dragons, we have a 6x5 board, so we have 30 orbs at our disposal with 6 different elements, 5 colors and hearts. So statistically, you should have 5 of each element available. However, there's obviously lots of variance, and it's never going to be the perfect 5, but you can just assume it's going to be 5, 6 or so, or like 4 to 6 orbs, generally speaking, from a given board. Now, let's assume you can combo at least 7 combos every turn, so that's 21 orbs removed. You will statistically replenish 3 to 4 orbs of each element every single turn. So, depending on the type of leader skill you have, this may or may not be enough orbs replaced to actually have consistent activation. So a rainbow team generally is okay in this scenario, because if you make 7 combos, you should statistically have all your colors coming down, you have leftovers from before, so generally they can. However, teams like Krishna are actually at quite a disadvantage in terms of a consistency point of view, because they require 9 fire orbs to deal sufficient damage in endgame content. Generally you want a bit more to be safe, but relatively speaking, 9 is enough for most things. However, to get 9 fire orbs is very challenging, because that's a third of the board has to be fire. So you have to find a way to put the fire orbs in such a way that they don't match, clear off other orbs so you hope more fire falls down, and at that point you may not be making many combos, so you don't actually replenish your board very well, you won't be healing very well because your combo count's low, and it's just challenging to actually have 9 fire orbs present unless you have good luck from Skyfalls, or his active skill that promotes the fire Skyfalls doesn't trigger fire matches as they fall down. So this is going to be forcing you to be using your active skills more liberally when playing Krishna, and it can be challenging when you're going through harder content, because you can't necessarily use an active skill every turn, but then you won't be able to kill the floor and it might be hard to stall. So it's just a tough situation when you're playing a very orb-hungry team like Krishna, and that's another reason why Krishna is sometimes regarded as a lower tier leader, because it's just inconsistent in activation. and that is tough when you're playing through the highest end content available. Another good example of varying consistency is comparing Kaede to Miru, who are both top tier leaders. They're both able to clear all the content of the game. However, their activation requirements differ. Both are heart cross leaders, so yes, you need to have those 5 heart orbs every single turn. That's at least reasonably feasible to have. You can have 5 heart orbs every turn if you maximize your board matching. However, Miru actually has her full activation just by matching a heart cross. You can match 3 light orbs or many light orbs in many different combos or patterns, and as long as you have that heart cross, you're dealing your full damage. So it's very easy for her to sweep floors and progress through a dungeon without active skills. Conversely, Kaede requires requires 3 unique wood combos for maximum damage, and that means you need 5 hearts and 9 wood orbs. So that's an absurd amount of orbs you have to have from a given board, and that's very challenging to acquire, even with the ability to produce 3 hearts and 3 wood every single turn of a Kaede system. But the point being is, it's very challenging to actually activate on a consistent basis your maximum multiplier. Furthermore, Kaede wants to make TPA matches because it's just the way the team is set up, that they like TPAs. So you have to have at least 9+ then for optimal damage. So it becomes very challenging to actually activate Kaede consistently. And this is another reason why Kaede sometimes is compared at a lower value to Miru, just because of the consistency in their maximum damage activation. So in essence, like when I say consistency in this case here, it basically refers to how easily you can, how easily you can activate their leader skill without using active abilities. So basically, by conserving active skills, you have a higher rate of success because you have them available at more crucial times. Next is damage control. And Gung-Ho has actually been slowly releasing more and more content that has some sort of damage controlling mechanism. Whether this is a healing mechanic in that if you do too much damage, it heals the boss instead of dealing damage, or it's a straight damage void in which if you do too much damage, you actually deal 0 instead. But regardless of what type it is, these mechanics are very dangerous to a lot of teams because if you deal too much damage, you will actually heal the boss. You won't be killing the boss, and you'll be very counterintuitive. You have to stall longer, you have to tank these large hits, and it just becomes problematic as you progress further and further in the dungeon. So in an ideal world, a leader skill should have some sort of scaling component. And a great example is I'm going to use Reincarnating Lakshmi, because Reincarnating Lakshmi actually is able to deal 6.25 to 100 times damage based on the number of connected heart orbs you match. So in theory, you have the greatest amount of damage control because you can choose how hard you're going to hit by simply matching more heart orbs. Conversely, Miru actually has terrible damage control because it is either 1 times if you don't make a heart cross, or 59.29 times if you make a heart cross. There's no middle ground, so you're dealing always that maximum amount of damage every single time. There's no scaling component, there's no variance. And having this amount of variance is crucial for these types of absorption or void bosses. In addition, this damage control also plays part in resolve bosses because, generally speaking, resolve bosses have very scary mechanics when you trigger their 1% ability. Most of the time they actually kill you, or they just do crazy amounts of damage, heal, and you just start all over again. It's just a nightmare overall. So by being able to control your damage, you're much more likely to succeed in higher end or end game content. And last but not least is how well can they handle a variety of dungeon mechanics. Now, there's all the dungeons that they're releasing nowadays have newer mechanics that are more dangerous, and they tend to throw in a lot of different abilities one after another. And how well your leader can tackle each of those individually will help determine how successful you will be. Now, generally speaking, these are kind of the broad categories I like to say that a dungeon can have. There are binds, so obviously bind immune leaders have an inherent advantage. There are combo shields, so you have to be able to actually maximize your combos, which can be challenging if you're playing, say, row-based heart cross teams, or especially row heart cross teams. The damage voids and absorptions that I mentioned earlier. Color absorbs, which means you basically have to forcefully stall on the floor. There's large preemptives, so teams that are inherently more durable can survive them. Resolves, which does play into the damage absorb voids. Gravity style attacks, which means that they're dealing a fixed amount of damage based on a percent of your health. So teams with, say, health multipliers, they're more vulnerable to gravity-based attacks because 99% health cut reduces them to 1 health. Whereas a hard cross leader that, say, had a 75% reduction shield is reduced to about 75-76% health. So an inherent advantage there. There are massive health pools from bosses, so basically you have to actually deal large amounts of damage. hazard orb generation or orb changing. So how crucial is it to have like various orbs on the board if they're creating lots of poison jammers or removing various colors that can force you to use active skills when you don't necessarily want to. And last but not least, it's kind of a broad aspect, is forced stalling. So basically when you have to stall for a prolonged period of time because the mechanics tell you to. Like you can't kill the boss for a few X number of turns, so you have to forcefully stall there. So each team out there does have inherent advantages against all these varying mechanics. However, what is going to separate a good from a great leader is the ability to counteract more of these mechanics. For instance, I play Krishna and Miru through Arena 3, and both teams are capable of clearing Arena 3 with reasonably high rates of consistency, and both teams are relatively well optimized. However, after playing numerous times with both teams, it's become apparent to myself that Krishna is an inferior leader because they're more susceptible to binds, they're susceptible to gravity-based attacks, and what is that last thing I wrote? Gravity-based attacks, and they're just a more orb-hungry leader skill. So with Krishna, I'm forced to use active skills on a more regular basis because I need those 9 fire orbs. Binds are much more dangerous because my leaders are bound, I lose my defensive multipliers, and if I have gravity-based attacks, it's a lot harder to heal up because if I get 99% health cut, I have to heal up so much more to restore my health compared to a Heartcross leader. So any one of these points are not necessarily going to cause me to lose, but having more and more weaknesses are going to add up over time. So if I played 10 Arena 3 runs of Krishna, I'd be losing a higher number as if I were to play it with Miru. So being able to counter all these various mechanics is crucial because, like I said, just because one thing is dangerous, if it's more so if you're, say, vulnerable to like 3 or 4 different things on this list, you're going to lose more often than not, so your consistency in clearing the dungeon does go down. So what leader should I use? So basically I've been talking for quite some time now, and you may be wondering what leader should I be using? And what you should be using for endgame content is the leader that you have the best subpool for. Basically the team that you are able to form as close to as ideal as possible should be the team you are using for endgame content. Because if, for instance, you have a Krishna team that has wonderfully well optimized subs, you should be using Krishna over Miru because you may be lacking all the key Miru subs, and just because Miru has a strong leader skill, if you don't have a good sub pool to support her, or inherits in that case, you are going to be lacking. So you should be using the team that you have the most potential with based on your monster box, whether it be subs and inherits. So that should be the team you invest your plus eggs into as well as latents. And when I look at various monster boxes, I try and identify what leader has the most endgame potential based on the subs they can bring, and that's what you should be investing in, because if you have an endgame team that's invested in, you are able to clear more content and progress further in the game. This will allow you to unlock additional rewards, as well as having the potential to acquire more resources at an easier rate so you can develop other teams to have fun with on the side. So basically, you should be using the team that has the most synergy with your monster box. That's basically the bottom line. So in conclusion, there are many factors that go into consideration when you are trying to rank how strong a leader is in Puzzle & Dragons. However, like all of those tier lists do presume you have to have the perfect team and setup, and if you cannot emulate it, it's just not going to be a strong team for you. For example, Raw Dragon is considered basically the strongest leader in the game, and for myself, I'm missing 3 out of the 4 key subs, so I'm just not going to have a good time. It's going to be horribly inconsistent. I'm not going to clear as much content as I do with even, say, a Krishna team. So it's just a problematic situation if you can't form the perfect team, or at least close to the perfect team. So what you do use will be based on your monster box and what you feel has the most potential. And you also have to enjoy the playstyle. If you are really anti-Heartcross meta and you have very comparable Miru Krishna teams from at least optimization points of view, you should be probably playing Krishna because you may enjoy that playstyle more. So let me know who your favorite team is and why do you think that leader has proven so successful for you in the comments below. This article will naturally be linked in the YouTube description, so you can take a look there if you wish to read at your own pace. So hopefully you have a fantastic day and happy puzzling.